What's up, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Itai. Today we have the semi-final matches in Pogchamps 2, so I'm super excited for that. And tomorrow we have the finals, so if you don't want to miss those, make sure you subscribe. Now, today we have Dogdog against Gripex. Gripex is definitely the player that everyone expects to win. He's been one of the most solid players in the whole tournament, so there's high expectations. Let's see what actually happens. Now, Gripex starts with the white pieces, and we end up seeing the Roy Lopez opening with bishop e5. Now, the Berlin defense is played, and now we have d3, very solid move, defending the pawn, but also unleashing the bishop. So it's a very nice idea. And now we see a very strange move, which is knight to e7. Now, there's a lot of downsides of this move, such as the knight moving backwards from a square that is very solid for it, here kind of controlling the center. It's moving to a square that's definitely less solid. Also, now the bishop is blocked from leaving, and I guess also the queen, although that is not as important in the opening phase. So this seems like a horrible move. There is an idea to trap white in this move. If knight takes the seemingly free pawn, you then have this move, the bishop moves back, and now you have this fork. But if white does see this and doesn't take the pawn, then this is just a bad move. So that's why I wouldn't recommend it, because the chance that white sees this, or the chance that white plays this, is probably very small. And if they don't, again, you have a very bad position. So in the game, Gripex does not play this. Obviously, he sees the trap that black is trying to do. And so you'll already notice that black, once they move the bishop back, whatever, they have to spend yet another move on, again, relocating the knight, because here it's just blocking all of the development that black wants to do. So you've now spent 3 moves on one piece, which gives white usually a very big advantage from the start. We see the move c3, preparing d4, and you definitely want to take advantage of the center in a position like this where you already castled and your king is safe. Now in this position, we do end up seeing d4, and now rather than taking the pawns, he plays a very smart move, d5. The idea is that white has a very strong center right now, and if you take and trade, white will still have a very strong center. So you don't want to allow that. Instead, you go ahead and claim a center of your own, so it's a very good move. And there are times where you can take pawns in the center like these, but generally beginners don't, feel comfortable taking this. So that's why this structure here kind of stuck for a couple of moves. You'll notice no player really took, and instead Dogdog focused on developing other pieces and pinning the knight that might be, very valuable later on. Here we see h3, the knight is traded, and now in this position we see knight to d2. What you'll notice is that with the move c3, the downside is the knight cannot develop there. And so you're going to have to develop it to d2. Obviously, you don't really want to go to a3, but that means that if you haven't taken out your bishop yet, you're going to want to, again, move your knight, which is why the queen ends up sliding over to d3, making space for the knight, which will make space for the bishop. So this is a good idea to allow the bishop to come into the game. We end up seeing the knight moving there, but now we see this trade that happens, okay? And what I wanted to point out is that black also has an opportunity here to play this move, which is taking on e4, because now there is this, obviously there's the fork here, so white will have to lose the exchange, and this is just way better for black. So black has the opportunity to do this because of how the pieces are positioned here, but instead black takes this pawn. Now there still is opportunity to take here, so instead of taking back, you probably want to push e5 first, stopping this fork from happening, also making the knight having to, make the knight have to move, and then the knight moves somewhere, and then you can take back, and you have a way better position than black. But instead, Gripex decided to take back, so the fork is still possible, and that's exactly what happened. So Gripex loses some material here, and we're moving on to a more middle game position where Gripex has less material. So Dogdog has played a phenomenal opening, even with the fact that in the start, he hinders his development. If we go backwards with this move, he still manages to land himself in a very strong position just a couple of moves later. And if I go back to the position, what you'll notice is that this, well, first I want to show you an option, which is bishop moving over here to b4, hitting the queen, obviously. Once the queen moves, then you're very, it's very close to being able to play. Obviously, the queen's not going to move there, but once the queen moves, you're very close to being able to give checkmate, only there's a knight. So this is a very, close idea, but it doesn't work. So the bishop moves here instead, which is a very nice diagonal for the bishop. The queen still has to move. And what you'll notice is that because of how important this knight is here guarding the e1 square, and because of the queen cuts off this h2 square, this back rank mate is possible. So the knight is stuck here, so you can take advantage of it by playing rook taking on d4, and again, the knight can't take because of mate. So this is a very nice move that you could have done. Instead, we see Dogdog trying to double up, which is still okay. The bishop develops, there's a trade that happens, and now white decides to trade the knight. Now, usually in an open position like this, bishops are better than knights. That being said, the knight here was a little bit annoying, and now that it's gone, you have files that you can attack with, and so there's already ideas like getting a knight to where the queen is and maybe trying to attack along this file. So this does create attacking chances for white. We see the queen moving around a couple times, and now this move is not what you want to do. If you're down in material, you don't want to trade because you want to have as many pieces as possible to be able to try to use tactics and trick your opponent into giving you back that material. So generally speaking, don't really trade if you're down in material. So you'll notice they trade a pair of rooks, and now it seems like black has a much more clear advantage. If we look back actually, and this is a great way to explain why you don't want to trade, here it's still very complicated. There's still rooks that can attack with, but now if you go a few moves later, you'll notice how much more apparent this advantage seems. The knight and the queen both guard this e1 square, so there's no mating possibilities. So instead, we just see a trade. Notice that now if the knight takes, there's a very nice move forcing the trade of the queen. So obviously, Dogdog wants to do this, which is why Gripex does not take with the knight. Instead, he takes with the queen. But now the queen tries to do a trade as well. The queen moves back. Again, a trade is trying to happen. And what you'll notice is that there is still possibilities for Gripex to try to get a mate because of this file. You'll notice if the rook ever moves, you have ideas of moving the queen, checking the king moves here, and then you have this beautiful, well, sometimes you'll have forks, but more importantly, once the king moves, you'll have this beautiful mate here on the h file. So there are still possibilities to attack here, but they're very hard to kind of construct here. So we see the queen's trying to trade. Notice that if this move, there's obviously a fork that can happen between the queens and the knights. It's probably better to give a check first. So that's not a good move. And now we see the huge blunder. So Dogdog playing phenomenal up until this point. He has a huge advantage, and he runs into this fork, which is why knights can be very tricky in late game situations. The king moves. Obviously, Gripex takes the free piece, and from here, it just continues going downhill for Dogdog, and we see a mate very quickly. So I'm very disappointed that Dogdog blundered there, because I do want Dogdog to win. I mean, it's always fun when the person that you don't expect to win wins, but unfortunately he blunders. He does still have a chance to win though in game 2, so let's go ahead and see what happens. So game 2, Dogdog has the white pieces. We see a d4 opening this time, a trade in the center, and then the light square bishop gets out very early. And when this happens, you notice that the pawn here on b7 is a very weak pawn, and if you manage to take it, a lot of times you'll win even more material with that. So now there's already threats of queen coming to b3 maybe, and forking pieces. Obviously the knight is defended, but in the future that's something that black really needs to watch out for. We see a trade of knights. The knight kicking the bishop back, and now instead of this move, we see queen to d3. The idea is very clear. You want to fork here, win the pawn back. So again, this pawn here is a very big weakness for black now. The knight comes, stopping this coming with check, so a very good move. And now we see e4. It might seem like you're blundering the knight because of the pin that comes. Obviously, black can just take the queen, so you can't take back here. But there's a very creative way to take back, which Dogdog did find, which is queen to b5 check. And it seems, I mean, this is a fork, but it seems like this is a fork that black can control by moving the knight back. So you save a piece and you stop the check. But the point is, if the knight moves, there's a bishop behind it, so you will win material back. So it's a very nice move that Dogdog found. Obviously, notice that in this position you don't want to trade because black will be able to first take the knight. Or take with the knight rather than with the king. So instead, you lose the knight. We see some more developing moves. Great job, by the way, by black not playing this move. Very tempting move, because then you blunder a pawn. So first, kick the queen back, then you can develop your bishop. Seems very solid. Black castles, white castles. We have a great position. here is where things get a little bit tricky. We have e4, e5, and then instead of moving the bishop back, you have f4. And the idea with this move is phenomenal. The point is the queen can move and still defend this bishop, but then black can take, and then black can take because of the pin that is created. So this is a phenomenal idea that Gripex found, but the problem is the whole thing happened. He played this move, queen moved back, we see a trade, and now there's a pin, so you can take, but instead he moves the bishop back. So he could have taken a pawn, but it's still a very solid position for both players. A queen trade happens. Rooks get activated to files that they feel like are going to be important. We see a trade, and now the pawn is taken here. Notice that if you take, black can swing his rook into a very active position, take a pawn, and then hit and threaten a couple of pieces. So this could be very bad for white. So instead of taking back, you definitely want to play f4, controlling more of the center. So this is a beautiful idea. You're obviously down material, but it's still the best move, I think. Also, you have ideas in this position now to swing over your own rook and start activating it. This, obviously, once the bishop moves, this is no longer as powerful because it's not a fork, but it still is a very solid move. It's played, actually. We see a trade of pieces, and here we actually see Dogdog winning Gripex's rook. So Gripex blunders a bishop here. So that's a very bad mistake here. I think either he pre-moved it or just very quickly took here because he didn't really realize that his bishop is going to be in harm's way. So he quickly took it, and then the pawn is also very dangerous, but it doesn't really. It's not gonna lead anywhere if you play this right. But obviously, Dogdog, in this position, blunders a bishop of his own. So both players blunder a bishop, and this is a very complicated position. Black has dangerous passed pawns. But a hanging pawn, and then white can maybe push a pawn. So it is dangerous, but it does seem like black has a way better position, and obviously only because of the passed pawns here. And then we see a big blunder where Gripex ends up, after a couple of checks, he ends up trading the rooks here. Now, why is this a blunder? He's like, oh, okay, let me trade, simplify, and then promote. Seems, simple enough. But the problem is after he trades, he's so eager to get his king in and start taking pawns that he blunders this pawn push forward, and now white is completely winning. White just, promotes first, black can take, white wins the piece, and from here Dogdog just wins all the pawns and then does a very beautiful promotion. This is probably the best way to checkmate. I mean, in this position, it doesn't really matter. You're probably going to checkmate regardless, but it's still, important to understand how nice this checkmate actually ends up being. So now we're going to game 3. This time Gripex does have the white pieces, and notice that in this game it's a much faster, time on the clock. Much less time on the clock, so they play much faster. So it isn't going to be as accurate. We end up seeing the exact same opening, identical to the start, where black tries this trick again. I don't love this move, but it is playable. Exactly the same. I don't remember if the bishop went out here actually, but the point is a very similar position, black castles, and then rather than first setting up with c3, we see a very aggressive d4 push, immediately. The pawns trade in the center a little bit, and now a beautiful move by white, trading the pieces here. And this is kind of a blunder because after take, you can obviously win a pawn, hit the bishop. It seems very good for white, but instead, in this position, after this move, Gripex doesn't take the pawn, and he first plays queen to d6. Blundering a knight. Black can take the knight now. Black can first take the queen in the game. Black took the queen, and then Gripex took the queen, obviously. And now, instead of taking the knight with the pawn, he takes it with the bishop. So in this position, you gotta take it with the pawn. Yes, they're under time, pressure, but he really should see this pawn or bishop. Obviously, you want to take it with the pawn. So Dogdog blunders as well, and so the game is certainly very interesting in this position. I do like this move. I don't know if it's the best move in the position, but eventually I do like the fact that you're getting out of this this pin here, so maybe you can start pushing your pawn. So it's relatively good move. We see some pawn pushes on the left side. You notice that Gripex plays very quick moves, bad moves, but he plays very quickly. He's playing for the clock. He's trying to get the good times on the clock, so he doesn't flag, which is a big problem. And what you'll notice in this position is that the knight guards both of these squares. So if a rook manages to swing over to this file, that's going to be mate. So White's bishop cannot leave here because of mate, but the white bishop checks the king, and now the knight goes to defend, which is a bad move. You definitely want to defend with a pawn in this position because your knight was doing a very critical, job of keeping the king on this first rank. We see a trade of pieces. The game continues with a couple of checks, and now it's a trade of rooks. Black seems to be, better here because he can take these pawns, but the problem is white has a very dangerous pass pawn, and none of black's pawns can push. Notice that none of black's pawns can push because there's always pawns that could, eat them. So here, there's always pawns that could capture them, and so none of black's pawns can push, and it's very sad. Black has to take time, a lot of time, into eating up white's pawns. In fact, he has to, even eat here because he can't push because white will capture. So it's a very sad position. Even though black had more material, he couldn't do anything with that material, and we see mate. So Gripex does move on. I did expect Gripex to win 2-0 in the match, but he does win. So nonetheless, he moves on to the finals tomorrow. Make sure you guys watch it by subscribing to my channel and so you don't miss out. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Peace out.